16. So going to do a quick review of last meeting. We talked about utilizing the travel fund for TSC and CTC members to go Node Interactive. I've taken that off the agenda this week because I think that's covered. Please let me know if you don't think it's covered already. We talked about folding the TSC into the CTC, and that's been talked a little bit as well on the CTC, but mostly it's been punted to GitHub. It's sort of too hard to move forward with, but we've got it back on the agenda again. And moving NVM into the foundation back on the agenda again today. There has been some movement in discussion on that one. So we'll have that discussion again today. Let's just get straight into the meeting.
Question, like I tagged the utilize travel fund thing, but I wasn't here last week. So like, what was the status of that anyway? I don't see an update in the issue.
Yeah, been a bit slack figuring out how to get these meetings done, these minutes done. We agreed to put out an announcement to the Node.js collaborators for active collaborators who need financial help getting to Node Direct North America. Michael Dawson agreed to put together a draft for this in the current thread. There you go, Michael Dawson. It's on you.
I may have forgotten to do that.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I will retake the action. Which issue was that again?
It is issue number 147.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, just yeah. No, I don't think there's any need to draft. Just put it in there as an announcement for Node.js collaborators.
Will do.
Oh, okay. So folding TSC into the CTC. I would. My thoughts about this are that we should try and come up with some options for how this would work. That's the real thing that this is depending on, because the concerns are around the practicalities of how it would work, how we would remain an efficient decision-making body, and not get bogged down in with people wanting to involve themselves at the last minute, and maybe even having to pass on the decisions to the broader TSC, all that sort of stuff. So what we need here is proposals for models, and then flush out. It's still, if there's any disagreements about those models, if they don't solve any the problems that still remain as objections. And I know there are still objections, and Jeremiah, you're one of the most vocal of the people objecting to this. Jeremiah, can I ask you, is there any model under which you would see this working, or are you just objecting in general?
A model under what specifically working?
The CTC and TSC becoming one body again. Maybe it's best to just get your objections out here and talk about those, because I think that's valuable.
I mean, I think if like we merge, then there needs to be like a full delegation of administrative responsibility to some sub-team, which is really not very different from what we already have.
Right. So we need a full delegation of responsibilities so that the group can actually make decisions rather than having to defer the final decision-making process.
And so that the other meeting isn't clogged with like stuff we might need to vote on for like travel stuff sometimes, because it's already like we already go over the hour like almost always in the other meeting.
Right.
I mean, I think the only way it's going to be efficient really isn't going to be much different than it already is. So if we instead change how we add people to these groups and just invite them to both and have sort of like a way to crossover that's not expedited but is available, So that would mean they would still go through like the trial period of whatever, where you're joining the call for a couple weeks to get like the feel of things, and then you get like added on to the TSC or CTC or whatever. I think like that's kind of a better way, because then you have like, I don't know, it's pretty much like the same structure, right?
The challenge I have, sorry.
No, go
Sorry.
ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree that we need some separation for the TSC functions that we've been doing to have an effective decision making. I am a little concerned that like the current structure is that the TSC actually has the responsibility and delegates to the CTC, and so unless if you combine them together and then figure out a way to make a subgroup, be able to make the decisions effectively, it removes the issue of, well, there are two different groups, and what if the group, the CTC, which is where I think there's been broader and more history in terms of the people that have joined and all that. What if they disagreed with what the TSC wanted to do? I think today there might be some surprise that the TSC would make the final decision.
So I kind of went back and I was trying to find out what problem this is trying to solve, and the only thing I saw was really a comment of how do we make sure that the TSC stays aligned with the CTC, and it seems like a lot of what ifs going on. And I think the beauty of what I admire most about the Node project is it's like a bottom up organization, and so like TSC might on paper be this bubble on top of the CTC, but like I feel like the most empowered people are at the bottom, and it trickles up to the board. And so now we're just kind of talking about putting the TSC like under this CTC, and that kind of goes against that flow, and I think it seems weird. And I haven't I can't recall a time when like there wasn't an alignment. So if someone can like kind of point out some real use cases of issues we've had, that would be helpful.
To answer Michael Dawson's, well, to address something that Michael Dawson said, like, I actually, this is a little bit more general, like the separate, like the explaining issue of like having two committees, we're still going to have, because there will be like an administrative team that is going to be fully delegated. It's going to have meetings. Someone's going to need to explain that it makes the decisions to like spend funds or whatever.
Right, but you could, one model might be it's one group, and a subset of that group goes and makes those decisions, and we've got the rules set up so that the people who don't show up don't slow it down, but if they do show up, they can have an equal say, and so therefore, in terms of decision making, it's really one group, but a subset of the people who are interested get involved in one particular type of decision. As opposed to have a smaller number of people who could overrule the decisions made by, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but they could overrule the decisions made by the larger CTC group, right?
What if we establish the baseline for TSC and then open up the option again for CTC explaining this background, that the TSC is ultimately on top, but as William said, it's maybe doesn't matter in fact, and then let the CTC members again choose if they want to continue being on the TSC, and then reset from there. And like, in other words, you get a one-time choice so that you can't jump in later.
But does it make sense that, like, we're basically saying people who are willing to be more involved in the day-to-day administration type decisions versus the technical decisions get a higher level say?
Well, the people
I don't.
Well, could also be at that higher. They can choose to be at that point too.
They can choose. So I'm not saying they'll be excluded, but you to continue to say, well, if I want to be able to influence decisions at that level, which is higher, I have to continue. I have to be involved in the day-to-day. Well, like, okay, are we going to support, travel funding? The kind of things we're breaking it off.
We would have that anyway, though, because like part of the reason that we're the separation of a separate team is that so people can't just jump in without context and like try to vote on something or hold something up, because that gets really awkward. Like if you don't care about this stuff, like I mean it's on like a regular basis, like it's really awkward for someone to show up one week and be like, well, I don't know if travel funds should be allocated to like X thing.
I'm a little less worried about that. Like, I don't know that people are going to actively come and slow it down. I'm more worried about, if the rules are such we need quorum that we never get. That's a big problem. The difficulty I see is people may not care about that decision and the bulk of them, but there may be some decisions that they do care about. And,
So we
Then they
have
can
to
join
like
as
balance.
non-voting members.
I think I think really kind of one of the big issues that we're attempting to solve with this is that there's not a lot of communication between the CTC and TSC, and I don't think voting is really going to like changing voting rules. I don't think is actually going to help with that. Because if we look at the things that we vote on, they are typically travel funding, which is something that I think most people just won't care about. Like the kinds of things that people will care about that the TSC is responsible for, we kind of do a consensus model, which means they can already participate, and being a TSC member doesn't actually give them any advantage in that, if that makes sense. So don't, right?
So what?
And also, I just kind of want to add, piggybacking off something Jeremiah said earlier, is that we'll end up with a structure that's fairly similar. I mean, I think we could probably make it a little better than what it currently is, but my concern is that it's going to take a lot of time in order to make this change. I mean, this is a pretty substantial change. This is probably going to require like rechartering with the board, negotiations with them, and it's going to take up a lot of people's time.
Not necessarily.
On that front, did we change the rule? Like, because when we started out, there was just the TSC, and that's it.
No, so like to be perfectly honest, changing this in that direction brings us more in line with the charter than we are now. We've actually sort of by wording things in a really particular way, we were able to make this split under the current charter. But the current charter actually describes something much more like a merged CTC TSC.
Right. When we started, there was one, and it was the TSC, and it's what we sort of renamed into the CTC and created the TSC for a slightly larger purpose.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the way that we worded it was that the TSC is delegating the responsibility of core to this group, so that we were still in line with the charter, because it's still, the TSC's responsibility to deal with core. They just, offloaded it onto this other group. So we wouldn't need any kind of charter change that I can think of.
So I'd like to just re-ask the question: what is a concrete real world example of a problem we're trying to solve?
So I have one, and my apologies for actually coming into this call late, because I had another conflict. But I think that the main thing that people are concerned with, and I have seen this in other issues, is that certain people from the CTC or maybe even the TSC will jump into threads and voice strong opinions when they aren't involved in the rest of the work that has actually gone into that group's function or that particular function. So I don't want to get into specifics because I don't want to call anybody out, but this has happened. And I think that the concerns that like Jeremiah is really voicing is that there's an amount of work that is like not that glamorous that somebody has to do. And the TSC is doing that. At some point, the inclusivity working group was doing some of that. And for people to jump in and have this very strong opinion when they haven't put in the rest of the work in maintaining that and taking responsibility for it, one, it's demotivating the people that are taking responsibility for it, and two, it really distracts and bogs down a lot of the work in unnecessary process.
That sounds like a reason to keep the TSC, in my opinion.
I think that there's a way to structure it.
But I do think like this open door policy of people can come into the CTC into the TSC from the CTC is a really good idea.
As long as there's as long as you can't just come in just to make one decision that you don't like and then disappear again.
Right.
Like, there has to be.
And I will point out that people that have been not contributing as much to the TSC that are technically on it have done that a couple times about like one single
Right.
issue.
And we actually see that in the CTC already. Like we have these decisions made at the CTC level where discussion has taken place on GitHub. It comes to the CTC for further, for final decision making. People are entering into that now where they haven't had the history of that issue. So already we have this problem of people not being engaged, but wanting the ability to make decisions even after not being involved in the history of things,
But
where
that's a
the
little
concerns
bit,
they might have are not even covered.
but we might that if we didn't need, like, if we were willing to just close it in the issue, like basically if you don't comment in the issue, you don't get a say, we wouldn't have that problem, right? So either we want to bring it to the larger group to get a final decision, or we should say we're going to push the decision down to, no, we don't need to take it to the TSC. We're just going to make it in the issue, because either we're trying to get broader views, or why bother bringing it, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a different problem, but I think the agreement here is that whatever happens, if anything happens, then that is a problem that we need to. Well, the problem of people dropping in and out, or not being invested in the process, but wanting the ability to control the process, is something that we
Right. I
need
guess
to
to me, it's like
be attuned
fundamentally, do we think that everybody in the CTC should have a say in these decisions, or is it okay to say that no, we'll limit those decisions to a smaller subset?
That is actually an interesting point too, and in that right now the only way into the TSC is through the CTC, which maybe is the right thing, but that it almost makes them.
True.
Yeah,
That's
and I
not
think
true.
actually we're more in the state where we don't even know how to get anybody into the TSC, right?
That's just exactly right. Yeah.
Well, just a point to make that William actually found this pretty recently is that a lot of these views on how do you get into the TSC turned out to not really to have been based on just like previous experience and things like that. But what the actual charter says is that anyone can become a member. Like you don't actually have to come through the CTC. I mean, hypothetically, anyone could just like open an issue saying like, "Hey, I want to join," and then like we could collaborate and say yes or no based on that.
No, but the holdup has been the reason that I've been holding that whole process up is simply because we set up this, the new structure with the idea of having this expansive umbrella project thing going on where we have multiple sub projects and we go governing them. But since we're not doing that anymore, there's all these questions about what is the relevance of this group now? What is it actually trying to achieve? And who should be on it to achieve those things? So sure, the docs might say one thing, but they also say we're going to have an umbrella program, which we don't have.
Yeah,
Well,
and I definitely agree that's an issue, in that, to me it's like, it's especially important because this group, based on what's written, the CTC reports to them, and I think we have a very clear sort of history and pattern for how people get there in terms of contribution, and so we want to be careful in putting another level above that may defeat that purpose, right?
Also, we just kind of settled on what is defining Node Core, and so what is the stuff outside of Node Core then? Who is overseeing that? And I was under the impression that's kind of where the TSC ultimately falls in. If there's nobody else, it's like a de facto thing. But now if we combine them, we'd have to address who owns the rest of that stuff now.
I think also, like, first of all, there are some things that we could break out from under the CTC that are there right now. Also, I will point out that in the latest kind of version of the recommendations for the future of inclusivity, it calls for creating a community group basically at the quote unquote same level as the TSC, assuming that the TSC is mostly kind of involved in core. But if you maintain that separation and core is on the CTC, then you could see that group basically operating with the TSC and at that level rather than at the core level. And there's a couple other things kind of maybe in the pipeline that the foundation will take on that are on the technical governance side that aren't specifically about core.
So there'll be groups who report directly to the board, right?
I mean, they would report directly to the board, but they would want to be in tight collaboration with the TSC as well. Well, I'll put it this way: they want to be in tight collaboration with whoever is running the technical governance side of the foundation, not
Right.
and these are outside of core. And in fact, like people that are mostly interested in core should really not participate in those decisions. So.
Okay, well let me pose a question then to see if we can shake out any issues here that we're not focusing on. If we were to fix up the membership crossover between the CTC and the TSC so that we could get interested parties from the CTC automatically onto the TSC in a way that solves our decision making, concerns about people dropping in and out. If we could figure that out, what are the remaining concerns that this issue is trying to solve that wouldn't be solved by that?
So that solves the membership, but they're still two separate entities, right?
Yep.
I think that there's
The
still a
other issue we get-
communication. There's still a communication problem
Right.
between the TSC and the CTC. I think that there's also the TSC needs to really figure out how membership is defined, how people come on, and most importantly, how people get pushed off if they're not doing anything.
Right, but if we figure, okay, let's take that whole thing and pretend that we've come up with a solution for membership and how to get people on and off, and how to make sure that people that are on the CTC who want to be on the TSC, like in this group, I think Michael, I don't think you're on the TSC. Anna, you're not on the TSC, but you're on the CTC.
So I'm not
Rich as
eligible
well.
I'm not eligible for membership in any of the groups technically because I work for the foundation.
And Michael Dawson, sorry, I was saying.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm not on. Yeah.
So individuals that are showing up each week and that have an aptitude and an interest in this administrative work, I want to find a way to get them on here that is logical. And if we solve that, and we have that path, but we also have a way to get other people on, and it makes sense to bring William and Josh on, and that's great. Are there any other real concerns about having these two separate groups that remain that we're trying to solve for? Because it comes back to the question of what are we trying to solve?
Right. The other one I've heard is the messaging about what the division of labor is. I think we need to crisp that up.
I was going to say that that's kind of what it sounded like Michael Rogers was getting at, that there are, I don't know what exactly he was referring to. I could guess maybe education related and stuff like that. Things that wouldn't tie to core, but would tie to TSC. And that might, like, if we don't have that, then it's like, okay, this is redundant because we're all working on the same thing. But if there are some things that don't come under core that would come under TSC in the coming months, then that makes sense. And it makes more sense to have two separate groups.
I thought defining node core was to help with that understanding the line.
Yeah, but then we came to the point where node core is the TSC's domain also.
Well, no, defining node core was about defining the domain of our activity under the technical group. That was really about limiting our what it is that we are delegated to take responsibility for from the board. And anything outside of that, we could take on, but we would have to have that discussion with the board. So it's not about CTC, TSC. It's about what is the domain here of our technical activity.
I see. So the node core, right? That actually defines the TSC's activity. Okay.
Yeah, this, so I'll just say anecdotally, just kind of an interesting thing to add. At NodeConf Italy and NodeConf EU, I gave a talk in which I talked about the structure of the foundation, and I spent some time defining the difference between the TSC and the CTC, at least according to my understanding of it. And people actually really seem to get it, and they're like, "Oh, okay, I get it now. That makes sense." And it just took a couple of minutes, a couple of slides. So yeah, I definitely think that's something that could just be solved through documentation. And that's just something we just need to write up and do.
Yeah,
I don't think that's
can
actually a big issue.
And back to William's
capture that.
Back to William's point as well about how the way it actually works now, we need to reinforce that, which is that the board exists to serve the TSC. The TSC exists to serve the CTC. They're not there to govern one another. They're there to support and be the thing that holds them up and lets them do what they do.
That's a really good way to put it, actually. Yeah, I'd like to see that translated into language that we can document. Also, just to go back to Rod's initial point, which is like, what are the issues that are left? I think that we need to put that question to the CTC, because a lot of this initial thread was kicked off by members of the CTC that aren't on the TSC. So
Yep.
there may be things that we're missing because we're like, involved in this work that aren't obvious. So I think we need to kick that question again back over to them, and have this discussion a little bit more with them as well.
So I would guess that this is technically the TSC's call on whether this can happen or not. And so I almost wonder if the TSC doesn't do it, if it causes contention now.
Yes, it does. And that's one of the interesting things about this, that if we accept that we exist to serve the CTC, and the CTC tells us, no, we want you to do this thing, and we say, no, we're not going to do it, that creates an interesting situation in itself that's sort of illustrative of the problems here. So our role here now in discussing this is, if we are talking ourselves into saying, okay, well, having the two groups makes sense, we need to go back to the CTC and say, here's what we think. Do you still have problems with this if we can solve these problems? Because I've actually tried to pull the concerns out of the CTC. It's been on their agenda for a few weeks now. I haven't been in all of the meetings. And at the last meeting yesterday, I raised it again, and I said, if you have concerns, or if there are, like, we were aware of some of the concerns, mainly voiced by Jeremiah, but if you have additional concerns, please put them in that thread. Colin, who opened the issue, did it because he has mainly been hearing people say this, and he didn't actually have any specific concerns he's trying to solve. I know Ben has some strong thoughts on here, but I haven't heard justification for it. So I've tried gently to pull out concerns, and I haven't seen them come out, other than really Jeremiah. But sorry, Jeremiah on the other end of not wanting to merge them.
Yeah.
So I think we need to actually do that work now of saying, look, if we agree here that we don't think it's going to happen, we don't think it makes sense, which sounds like we might be talking ourselves into. If we say to them, look, we don't think this makes sense, and here are the things we'd like to solve. What are we not addressing here that you have concerns about? Is there anything remaining?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a really solid idea. And in general, I'm just a big fan of, I feel like with this whole merging CTC, TSC, and a bit we've sort of jumped to solution without really defining the problem a lot. And there's definitely a problem here. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but the fact that people are raising means that there is a pain point. There is something that needs to be addressed. And I think it would be a really good activity for us to work with the CTC to figure out exactly what that is, and work about this from the perspective of, here's a problem that needs to be solved, instead of here's a solution. Because I think my view on this, I'm very skeptical of merging right now too, but that's because my understanding of what the problems are, like, I'm not sure that the solution will solve what my understanding of the problems are. But I also accept that my understanding of the problems is probably not accurate. So yeah, and maybe this is something that would be good to bring up at the Collaborator Summit at Node Interactive. We can all kind of sit in the same room, or well, a good chunk of us can kind of sit in the same room. And maybe we could do a town hall meeting off schedule that's like the CTC and TSC together, and we could all talk about this on a conference call. I don't know, just thinking of ideas.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea as a way to get people to voice problems. I'm not sure, like, from my perspective, I don't know that I've heard people voice concrete problems, but I think it's more along the lines of, why does it need to be different, right? It's not that there's trying to solve a problem, it's just people see no reason why it's not just one body.
Yeah, and I also, like, for example, Ben just doesn't want to have meetings, and so having two groups means we have two meetings, and he would rather just do it all in 1 hour.
Well,
Right.
Ben's also not very interested in the topics in the TSC anyway, though.
No,
I think one of the things with Ben is he's still a member of the TSC, but I don't think he's willing to let go of membership, because technically the TSC still has enough power to take the technical organization in a direction that it may not want to go. So I think that's a real problem, and I'd really like to solve that problem.
Yeah.
So that's the connection issue between the two groups.
I'm not sure if Ben works exactly the same as I, but like, for me, it's more, like I have to feel the TSC doesn't really have it figured out yet. Like whereas the CTC, it seems on a roll. It's like unstoppable. It will go fine from here. Basically, whatever happens. Not obviously whatever happens, but the TSC is kind of like still in flux, like open, needs to invent itself. And so, like for me, I would leave this TSC, which I mean, it's not like I do it much, but I would leave it if it, had, its purpose and it kept rolling.
Maybe what we need to do is outline a little bit clearer what is being delegated to the CTC and make it clear that like the TSC, no longer owns contribution policies and a bunch of other things that they might be worried about us stepping on.
And also outline a policy of ensuring consultation with the CTC in a whole lot of areas. Anything that impacts the technical activity and the contribution activity, that the TSC must consult with the CTC before making concrete decisions.
I think also too. I think another thing that we shouldn't discount as well is that board representation is tied to the TSC, and if they want to get things to the board or they want to feel like they're connected to the board, whoever is in that role, or if we end up splitting the roles like we talked about earlier, those people need to remain in contact with the CTC, and the CTC needs to have like.
That was what I was trying to get at the beginning, which I don't think maybe I didn't get it across, is that I think the concern is going to be because of the TSC being above the CTC. If the TSC was a group that their powers were delegated from the CTC, then there shouldn't be the concern that the TSC can take the technical direction in the wrong way, right? It's because they will have delegated the subset of things, the administrative set of things that the technical people don't want to get involved into this subgroup. But if that subgroup starts to not line up with the bigger group, it can be pulled back. Whereas the current structure doesn't allow that, right? And therefore, if you want to make sure that you're in that sort of decision-making process, you have to go into the one where the decisions, the day-to-day stuff, you may not want to be involved in, but you don't want to give up the overall sort of control point.
So a couple just kind of quick thoughts. Going back to the modeling aspect of this is there is already kind of a model in place that maybe we might want to investigate, and that's the relationship between the board and the TSC. There's certain restrictions on how that works. The board is explicitly not allowed to make like technical decisions, for example. Maybe we want to look into modeling the relationship between the TSC and the CTC the same way the relationship is modeled between the board and the TSC. And there's lots of other things we could do too. For example, let's assume that the CTC says that representation on the board is a concern. We could always open up voting for the chairperson to the TSC and the CTC, or even all Node.js Foundation individual members. There's a lot of ways that we can rework things to address these issues.
Yeah, it's a matter of pulling out all the concerns. We've got to figure out what the concerns are.
Yeah,
and maybe the people that are saying that are most vocal here don't even know what their concerns are, and just the fact that there's this instinctual objection to what's going on suggests that we just haven't got things right. It just doesn't seem right, but we need to figure out what that actually means.
Like definitely, and I think that sorry to interrupt, Jeremiah. Like that instinctual feeling of something's not quite right here. I think that's really important. I think when people have that, just because they can't vocalize it, just they have that feeling something's off. I think that usually turns out to be right, and I think it's really worth it for us to really investigate and try and figure out what that is.
Yeah. So can I add something? Sorry for not seeing that on GitHub. Like I think my biggest intuition telling me that something's not quite right is the fact that there's two groups that like people-wise they overlap 80%, but technically one is like the boss of the other. With regard to, I understand that we are consensus-driven and like I don't know, the TSC serves the CTC, etc. But that seems like a kind of like a pointless thing. I feel like I guess for me.
Are we? I think that we're kind of dancing around an issue a little bit. Like like there has never been a point in time where the TSC said, "Hey, this is what we're doing," like, or told the
True.
core what to do, or told the CTC what to do. Like, that's never really happened. I think that there's a lot of fear that, you know, if the CTC spins up or charters a community group, or a group that basically does things like, you know, organization-wide moderation or organization-wide codes of conduct, that would be something that the CTC would have to, essentially they would be delegating that authority. And that's probably going to need to happen, like, for a bunch of reasons. And I don't think that there's a lot of getting out of it. And if that's people's concern, then I think that we need to address that, like, directly.
So I just want to
I think
pose.
saying that it's never happened doesn't help the fact that, like somebody just said, you know, one group is the boss of the other and they can is the issue, not whether it will or won't happen.
Yeah, I find hypotheticals very useful still. I know that a lot of people don't like the idea, this has never happened, therefore it's not a problem. But no, because it can happen, you know, they're like, we can consider ourselves the current generation of this group. The next generation may look completely different. And also, if we take some parallels with what the board's doing and what the board could do, for example, the board could say to us, okay, we need to all switch to GPL. It just has to happen. So please make that happen. Like, we're not going to like that, okay? So, you know, we might kick against that. But there is a relationship of power there that could make some contentious things happen, and that might still exist between the TSC and the CTC. So,
if all of our current corporate members left and new ones came on and took over the board, then that could happen. Yeah, that particular thing.
Well, I mean, I think this is actually a very interesting topic, because it begets the question, like, where do topics like this, like, where, you know, what license we use, where would it actually, or where should it be discussed? And from my perspective, although a lot of people that are into CTC would have maybe an opinion about it, it is not really the appropriate place. But I would also feel that doing that in the board is not the appropriate place, or only in the board, because then it becomes, I don't know, sort of purely the wishes of a big company. So I think that the TSC could have a function where it tries to tackle all kinds of different topics that are not related to you know, the pure technical details, but in a way that is accessible for community members, and not just for I'm saying community members here as individuals, and not just for companies that are represented on the board. And you know, other things to consider would, for example, be marketing, you know, the whole, like, education stuff, and like. But the truth right now is that we are also not discussing those things on the TSC very much. Like, it's all like, okay, let's define ourselves. Seems to be the overarching topic for the last 6 months.
So we actually do have somebody from the CTC who sits in the marketing stuff at the foundation level, just to maintain some communication there.
But that makes someone from the CTC makes very little sense, really, from, you know, in my opinion, unless they are representing, like, sort of the technical challenge when you want to build a website. But I'm not sure about that.
Well, no, it's Miles. So he's in the LTS working group, and and there's a lot of stuff that comes up around releases that he's involved in, that is very important to have him, like, associated with the marketing efforts, because we tend to market a lot of the releases. So, I mean, it's a good person to have as that point of contact. All I'm saying is that we don't want to be too rigid in how we structure, you know, each group is only responsible for these things, and we can rely on communication between groups and collaboration between groups. We shouldn't be, you know, that rigid about things, and sort of divvying up responsibilities. Also, and I will say, I do find the hypotheticals helpful, but the hypotheticals that might actually happen, that we think that are likely, are the ones that tend to drive what people are afraid of. And all I'm saying with that is that if there are hypotheticals that people are actually worried about happening right now on a practical level, we should address those directly, not try to skirt around it by talking about, you know, the scope of authority for each individual person.
But the hypotheticals of what people are worried about now, because the CTC is currently on a drive to make their processes even more efficient. So do even less meeting stuff right now. Like that's the current theme of the CTC. Let's be more efficient at getting stuff done and not have to worry about meetings as much. And that's working out really well. So they don't want to be involved in more meetings. They don't want to have more process involved in what they're doing. And so I think it probably all comes down to this authority that is defined. So it's the defined authority. It's not about actual things that are happening or even could happen in the near future. It's that stuff exists, and they don't want to have stuff forced on them that they have no ability to impact.
So I think like if we're gonna become like a lot like the board and pretty much be like a community board, like maybe that's the wrong direction.
Yeah, well, not a board in the sense of having membership that comes from members, but administrative functions sort of it is a parallel to the board. We exist to serve the group that is technically below us, but we're the facilitators of those things that keep the machine going that aren't strictly technical.
Folks, can we wrap
on?
this?
Yeah.
Yeah, we only have 10 more minutes, so we gotta. I have some stuff to bring to the private session too, so we gotta.
Okay, we need to find a way forward here. Unless someone else can come up with a good way forward, I guess I'll put it on my head to come up with a way to step this forward with the CTC and figure out how to come to a decision point.
Also, I think that we should literally just list the things that the TSC is responsible for and the things that the CTC is responsible for that they have 100% authority over and ownership over, and that might put to bed a lot of the concerns that people inside of the CTC have. I think we'll still have a communication problem externally where people externally think the TSC is responsible for core, but that's the next problem to deal with. Once we have a consensus internally, we can message that externally.
Well, technically, we are responsible for core. It's just all delegated to the CTC, right?
But that's like saying that the CTC is responsible for the build system. Like they're not. The build working group is, right? Like where they exist on an org chart doesn't delineate responsibility.
They own the CTC. Could basically say, we're going to make decisions. No, we're not going to build it that way. Even if the build working group wanted to do something else, technically.
Yeah, but no, technically they could, but in practice they don't. The build working group pretty much does what it wants, and occasionally says, "Oh, hey, CTC, can you weigh in here, please?"
Yeah.
But let's face it. Like this is how everybody's job works. Like Michael, your boss could tell you exactly what to do, like from minute to minute, but they don't, and they don't even know what they're
exactly
telling
right.
You, right?
We
I understand. I'm just saying technically they can't.
Well, no, they actually can't. So the way that I wrote the bylaws is that once your group is chartered with a responsibility, the group on top of you can't tell you what to do within that domain of responsibility. All they can do is essentially decide not to use you.
Right.
So I mean, if the CTC decides to use a different build system than what the build working group is working on, they can do that. But what they can't do is step into the decision-making process in the build working group and tell them what to do. And similarly, the TSC can't tell core what to do. We could just decide to have a different node core, right? Which is just, never going to happen.
And this goes all the way to the top too, like the board could technically do the same thing to the TSC, right?
They could move it to Java.
Exactly. Or they could be like, oh, we don't like the way the TSC is doing things, so we're just going to dissolve it and create a new body and maybe even do a fork or whatever. I mean, it's like there's always this existential threat that at the top level of the foundation, the board can rewrite everything, right? We have to have a little bit of trust that that's not going to happen because there's literally nothing that can be done about it.
Okay, let's move on. Yeah. I think this has been a very good discussion. Actually, it's good. Thanks very much. I think William for taking notes here. Not William, Josh. Okay, let's quickly move on and see if we can get some more stuff. The revised membership rules. That's James's topic, and he's not here. Does anyone have trouble with us skipping over that one for now?
No. I just want to make a note that I made like a comment that wasn't that I think is important that wasn't addressed for like, I don't know, it's been like 2 months or something.
In that issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you just comment again and point to it so that it pops back up into James's inbox?
I get the impression that James has been a bit distracted with other stuff recently.
Yeah, I throw a lot of stuff at him. I don't know how many other people are throwing a lot of stuff at him. So just the things that I'm throwing at him are probably like a full-time job. So I don't know what other people are also throwing.
Okay.
I did ultimately like what he had there. I want to just emphasize again, I would like to propose to the board that we change the bylaws so that what's written there is actually enforceable. And I have a comment listed in there on why and how that is. And it basically, the bylaws are just changed to delegate the wording there onto the charter, because right now it kind of has an overriding thing in there about membership.
Okay, I'll look at that. Okay.
Cool.
And okay, take that to GitHub. So let's move on to NVM now, because there's been some further discussion here. I haven't caught up with the latest since I made my comment yesterday. Does anyone want to start this discussion here?
I think I'm a good candidate because I'm kind of
Thanks,
championing
Josh.
over here. So Jordan, I saw he joined the call for a minute, but I guess he dropped off because he got bored with us. When he first asked if we wanted to take NVM into the foundation, and I think it's clear from him throughout the thread that he is most interested in that project itself, that exact repo. But I think we all have gradually reached consensus that if we would take in NVM, it would only be under a greater mandate to develop a consensus environment manager, runtime manager that everyone agrees to. So the other stakeholders, the other maintainers that are out there, we would invite them in and have them discuss as well. I think we've reached consensus on that point. I guess we can discuss that in a minute. But assuming we have, then the next question is, do we want that role, that management of environment managers in the foundation? I think that, Rod, that's what you're getting at in your comments yesterday. And so my last comment, which I know was right before this meeting, so I don't expect anyone to have read it yet. I put up a gist where I answered a lot of Rod's questions. Let me just jump to it real quick. Essentially, the three factors are that we need a manager which would support all of Node's platforms and configurations. The goals would be a manager for all of our supported platforms, facilitate close collaboration between the runtime core and the runtime manager development, and make things more usable for downstream developers. I think the stage we're at is that if we can get consensus perhaps around that gist, I've just posted into the local thread here if you want. If we could get consensus around that like the core idea, and I think, Rod, you're probably the main dissenter actually at this point, that we...
That might be a close second.
Okay, I don't hold this, that like I'm putting out that this is why we should do it, but like I totally understand the objections.
Well, so I really what Rod said about creating this group to kind of explore and find out what we want to consider even it is a good idea. And some of you may have noticed that I did ping the N project and also noticed and like literally in minutes, TJ Webb from the N project came and made a comment and started participating. I mean, that shows one that we've excluded from this conversation some of the other groups out there up to this point, and also like it was so fast that he came. There's definitely a high interest there, and so and then shortly after we got a comment from Noticed as well. I think that to me shows that there's still feedback that's out there, and we should wait to hear what other people have to say.
So,
Are you saying there's feedback that we should not coalesce on NVM, or there's feedback that about whether to pursue the concept in the foundation?
so
I would say the concept.
Okay. Well, so okay, I don't know how much I care about the feedback of people who, have their own version manager that they maintain. In terms of, at a high level, do we take on responsibility for this problem, right? I think that we should mainly be thinking about Node users and the install base, and if we can provide them a better experience than they have right now. And if we decide that we want to take on that responsibility, if that's something that we're going to do, then the question becomes like, do we allow any version manager that wants to come into the foundation to come in under the with the understanding that we may end up deprecating them if we decide to, but under this group, do we just allow anybody to bring in their project, or do we literally just say no, we're starting a new one? Because we have a project that wants to come into the foundation for a variety of reasons, and we're sort of like holding that up, saying, well, we need to figure out this kind of meta issue.
I think I'm kind of advocating for not bringing it in from the get-go, and instead starting with a formal or informal group, whatever it is. We probably need a repo to just put some documents up, and just call a meeting with Jordan and the other stakeholders. I know I have a.
That's essentially what I'm asking for as well, and I think that William has said as well. That's so instead of just saying, okay, you want to come in, that's great, we'll bring you in. So I don't have a deep problem with that. It's simply that it's putting the cart before the horse and potentially opening the floodgates to things that we may not actually, we may decide that we don't want to be responsible for. So we have to be clear that yes, this is so we've defined our scope of what we're responsible for. This is now a question of, do we want to expand that scope? And so we have to consider that carefully. Are we expanding our scope into this area? If so, yes, great, let's do that. But we can't just say, okay, we've got a project that wants to come in, let's bring it in, if it doesn't fit within our existing scope. So my call was to let's come up with strategy here. Let's come up with some ideas about what it is we're trying to achieve, and they don't have to be perfect, and they don't even have to be necessarily things that we have to hold the group to. But we have to see that there are people that want to invest their time and energy in this, so that we don't just end up with projects like Node.js that nobody really wants to own, but we have to maintain simply because they're ours now. Mm-hmm. And B, that it will end up serving Node users better than what they have now, because it is very possible that if we reduce the competition in the ecosystem by promoting one project over others, and we don't look after it very well, that we actually end up serving users even worse than they're served now.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that one of the things that's going to get flushed out is, what can we do as an organization better than people in the ecosystem can do, right? Like, for most questions, the answer is that we can't. Like, we have a better ecosystem. I think this is one of the rare occurrences where we actually do possibly have some real advantages. One is a nonprofit organization that's like a central point of authority, and also our integration with core development. Like, we may be able to do things in this space that people can't do in the ecosystem, and that's why we would want to take on responsibility for it.
I know this is like kind of on the technical level, but like, I mean, it'd be a lot easier to get the conversation rolling if we actually like owned a version manager to just ship it by default in installers, and that would make a lot of people's lives way easier.
Yeah, so I very much agree with Jeremiah here. I think from like a user experience perspective, having a version manager shipped and bundled and like officially supported with Node would just make the user's life easier. And so that's really, I mean, that's a reason I would say do it. But then
we're the only people that can do that, right?
No, the CTC can do that, and they don't need to own NVM to do that, just like they don't own NPM. They could be doing that now.
Bundle NVM as is because of because it doesn't meet some of its principles.
We could fork NVM. We could add code to the node binary to do crazy stuff and switch stuff out. Like there's a lot of ways in which you could do the version management different than one that's shipping now. All I'm saying is that the only organization that could just make a decision to ship a version manager would be, you know, the Node.js Foundation.
But
Like
that's not not the question we're dealing with here, and nobody has actually formally proposed that except as hypothetical. So if somebody wants to propose that, go and do that in the Node.js node repo or in the EPS repo. This is not the place for that. Go and propose that elsewhere. The proposal we're trying to deal with here is, do we want to take responsibility for NVM? Are we willing to accept this thing on and own it? You know, once we buy it, we own it. We're stuck with it.
That's a good
Doesn't
point.
Yeah.
So really the question here is only about MVM, and us taking it bigger should really start a new thread.
Yeah, and to talk about the installer and like possibilities there, just I mean, we already kind of have a model for like how that could be accomplished if someone wanted to, and that's actually with Node Chakra, and that was not, even though that's very, very tight integration with Node Core, that was not undertaken by the Node Foundation directly, even though there was a relationship there.
now it's under the CTC though.
Well, it is now, but I mean, there is. I'm saying there is a model for demonstrating how this kind of integration could occur without having to bring it in first. So, like, I don't think that's a valid, or I don't think that's a very strong argument for bringing NVM in.
Well, I think that NVM is to a point where it works as much as it will work as its own service outside that's not already installed with Node, right? It's at a point.
Yeah, but people have objections to that because it doesn't work on Windows, for example. So
yeah. I mean, there are opinions for sure. Yeah.
Well, we wouldn't be able to ship MVM without it supporting Windows, and it never will because it's a bash script.
I mean, that's an open question. Why could we never do that without supporting Windows? But I still think what you should do is like ask yourself the larger picture first. Like, do we think it's a good idea to have a version manager? Would make it a user's life easier. If this is the case, and we want to get on a path to shipping it with Node or endorsing it, whatever, then we can decide. Okay, can we have this project under us? Like, do we have the confidence that there will be enough people maintaining it? I think from the perspective of NVM, the Node Foundation is great. Like, it provides infrastructure for and to build on a project in an open collaborative way. And the only reason we would not want to have support that is if we think it's a bad idea, or if we think that there's nobody who will do the work. Like, given that the TSC itself is not going to maintain NVM.
So although Rod said it in frustration, I actually think that a good next step would be to create an issue in Node Core that just says, should Node ship a version manager?
It could be, if you read my gist, I think that's pretty much what I'm taking that position that it should and defending it with 3 points. So I can turn that into tell me where you guys think we should put it, and I could put it there.
I think Node.js/Node, because if we put it in any of the other meta repos, the right people won't see it.
Well, the EPS one would probably.
I think a lot of people unsubscribed from EPS during the whole module.
I kind of would prefer not the main one, but I'll go with.
Or the CTC repo as well. That's another place. I think. I don't know. So okay, that whole question, like, I don't even want to have an opinion on that, because instinctively I'm like, no, because I don't use version managers. I don't particularly like them, but I understand that they are very popular out there. So what I really want to be able to do is to say, okay, there is a group of people here that are interested in this question and are able to form opinions that are well informed. And then advise us on what, or advise the CTC on what to do next. That's what I'm really would. I want to see that there is a group of people. It's not just Jordan, and even if it is just Jordan, that he's going to stick around with us for the long term. That there's a group of people that are willing to push an agenda here that we can delegate stuff to. And if they want to go away and explore this area and come back to us with a proposal and say, look, we believe that NVM is a great starting point for this, then we can say, okay, you've got this recommendation, looks great, let's go ahead with that. I just don't want to say, okay, let's bring this project in, and then like, wow, we own this thing, who's going to do stuff with it?
I really feel similarly. Like, I know that I've been advocating this because I think it'd be great for users, but like at the end of the day, I want a group of people who are really passionate about this to be shipping it in Node. And like, if that group doesn't exist, then we should not do it.
Yeah.
But it looked like the authors of N and Node.js were already chipping in, so that's pretty much the top three of the version manager ecosystem that was interested in this thing. So I mean, I'd say, like, at least from the outset, it looks like there is some interest now. And I mean, I don't know how long Jordan is going to stick around. That's something we would honestly ask him. But if he wants to stick around when we get the end guy, and like, we'd be good, I guess.
There's one of my colleagues here at Microsoft has been working on an implementation, which actually Jordan and him have been collaborating on a bit. That's JavaScript oriented and that works on Windows. So he would also be part of it. Maybe what we're saying is we need like an experimental working group. Like, we don't want to officially say this isn't a working group and we're going to keep this, but we need a place to get things started, and then we can make a decision in a month or two, go or no go.
That's what I've been asking for. So maybe the way forward here is to say, Josh, do you want to take that as a to-do? Try and pull together a group. Just a discussion group is fine, and to feel out what the interest is, to feel out what the direction is, and if that turns into something that can come up with a fully formed proposal for us, that we can say, great, you guys care and have an opinion, you can do that. If that's the outcome, that's great. But maybe the just kickoff is to just get people together.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that seems like the right next step. I'm be willing to do that. I kind of would like a repo so I can dump a bunch of docs somewhere.
Yeah, go for it.
Great. Do you have ability to make a repo in the org?
I'm not sure. I'll check.
What do you want it to be called? Version management, or you had a different name, didn't you?
Let me think about it.
I think it sounds like, I mean, based on the current sort of talking that we're doing, there's no condition by which we're going to bring NVM into the foundation.
I
don't know that's what we've said. I think if this group gets together and says NVM is the right answer, maybe, because I could even see you might have two of them, one for Windows, one for Linux, and it might be the right Linux one, right?
Okay.
Or
and
not.
maybe if the way it's this new Uber manager, then great, but NVM still needs some sort of phase out period, and bringing into the foundation is the way to do that. Maybe that might be the way forward. I really,
if we're doing that, I don't think that we would want to do that. I think that if they want a home to do a gradual phase out because we're shipping one, then they should go to the JS Foundation.
They should just hold their breath for half a year. Like, upgrading the version manager is going to be really easy. So I would not be so concerned.
Okay, so are we seeking consensus? Are we calling for vote? I'm curious.
We've got nothing to vote on here, as far as I'm concerned. And if we want to vote on bringing NVM, I still think it's too premature, because it's a bigger discussion than just NVM.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's premature to bring them in too. But yeah, I definitely like the idea of setting up the repo and having the discussions. Yeah.
Okay,
I don't feel like we as a group can by ourselves come to the decision, and maybe not even the CTC by themselves. I think we need this input from a whole bunch of different people.
And you know what? If there's a group of people that want to do a working group around version management, then we shouldn't stand in the way of that. And if they want to come, like, we should be facilitating that kind of stuff. So if there's a group, if they can pull together a interest group that looks at this whole question, then that's absolutely our role to facilitate that.
I agree with you, Rob. And so what I saw in the GitHub thread is like a couple people chiming in that they're basically now looking at us to tell them what their next step should be. And so our message is going to be, get a working group together with you guys and make a recommendation for us. And
you tell us what the next steps are.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And show us you're going to own it going forward.
This is great. I like this.
Okay, I'm making a repo. I'm going to call it version management. It can be renamed at some point in the future if you want to. Josh, I'm going to give you access to do what you want with it, and let's talk about it in 2 weeks.
Point of clarification: if this working group is formed, where would it seek charter? CTC or TSC?
let's leave that to them to decide.
Yeah. Let's talk about
they
that
should
later.
not charge. I mean, come on. They should just have like 3 meetings or brainstorms, whatever, in a GitHub thread, and then.
Okay, so it's a group, and it's
Yeah.
just a team, not really a working group.
Let's not call it a working group now. If
Yeah.
it wants to become a working group, whatever.
Yeah,
the
It's
whole-
a team. Maybe it'll become like a sub project at some point. So,
yeah.
but
This is just a discussion group for now.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay,
Ugh.
done.
Love taking on more responsibilities.
Yeah, and you're so good at it, Josh. So. Okay, can we round that one out now, and under the assumption that it's still open, we'll come back to it in 2 weeks' time and hopefully have something more to discuss. Everyone happy with moving on?
Mhm.
Sounds good to me.
Yep.
Okay, done. Now, is there anything else for public session that we want to cover? We're running way over time.
I had briefly mentioned something about the access
yeah.
to YouTube, but it's really not high importance or anything. But it's really about documentation and a discussion about, what is the path for permissions in these other foundation-owned entities. So,
And actually within GitHub as well, there's a broader discussion. But in this particular case, I don't think there's a problem at all. It's just a matter of, I think Michael just wants to see if one of us can do the adding. Is that all it
I'll
was?
take a look
Yeah.
at that.
So just some background. Up until a couple months ago, you could only have one owner ever in a Google Plus thing, in a Google Plus page, I guess it's called. So I had to add everybody manually, and there was no way around it. Then they added the ability to add other owners. So I promoted a bunch of people to that. In my opinion, the way that this should work is that anybody who is a team maintainer of a team on GitHub, that means that they're basically bringing on enough people for that team on GitHub, and they're probably running meetings. Those people should all have at least access to the Google Plus account so that they can, do the Hangouts and record everything. And everybody on the TSC or CTC, if they want to, should be an owner. And I'm fine with promoting anybody who wants to be an owner over there.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Group. Okay. We can take that back to GitHub then, that particular one. Okay, let's finish out this public meeting. Unless Q&A. Do we have any viewers of this meeting still
There's
left?
3 viewers. We don't have any questions.
Okay, well, let's 1 minute to if you've got any questions and you're listening to the live stream, please drop them in now. But we do need to move on, so got a minute.
And do we go over meeting times here of other meetings? Do you want to do that quickly, someone?
I don't have a list, but so no.
Okay. Our next meeting apparently is Thursday on November the 17th.
Yes.
At the same time.
The CTC meeting is undecided at this stage because Rich is going to possibly come up with a third time option. So it'll either be at the adjusted time that it's been alternating with, or some new time. But you'll have to stay tuned for that next meeting time.
And
Next week.
I'm guessing our proposed live meetings, the one I proposed live meetings at Node Interactive probably won't happen. It hasn't been any movement on that. It was people were a little optimistic at first about maybe doing a live meeting with like an audience and everything, but haven't heard much else on that.
So I believe I commented on it, and I said that we can't get the AV to work for that many people during the conference days, but we could do one at the collaboration summit. We could just all kind of huddle around the table and then get everybody around us to do a live one during the collab summit if we wanted to.
I'm just hesitant to say yes to anything like that. That we have to then organize amidst all the other stuff that's being organized. We could try, but I would hate to have to be held to it at this point and then get there and say, okay, how are we going to make this thing work? But maybe William, I mean, if you want to take it on and say, yeah, let's make it happen, and you want to take that as a responsibility, then sure. I just don't want to.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing a lot of collaborator summit stuff.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of us are.
I guess
got
I
other
just
stuff
need to
going
know
on.
who to sync up with for the details on the logistics.
Make sure you use the right type of microphone.
Probably Michael and Tracy.
Well, no. So we could do it without any microphones, right? Like we have a big room that people are just sort of like coding in and then working with each other. So
That
we would
only
just,
works
like,
if everyone
Oh,
comes down there.
Yeah, we
And
need
we
we
also
need people
can't
to be able
live
to
stream
call
it
in.
then.
Oh, you're talking about the con. Well, yeah, no. I mean, we could like set up a laptop or whatever, but yeah, that would suck.
It's the logistics are kind of complicated.
Okay.
Look, so William, the message here is if you want to take on the challenge of trying to make the logistics work, personally, I don't have any problem, and I suspect others here won't do, as long as they have the ability to interact if they're not going to be there in person.
All right, I will see what I can do.
Wait, is
All right.
anybody on this call right now not going to be there in person?
Anna, are you coming? You're coming, aren't you, for the Collaborator Summit?
I'll be there, right?
Yeah, I approved a check for that. So.
And Brian, you'll be there as well.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Huh,
I
okay.
don't think I'll be there. I don't know.
I think we'll probably drag you there anyway, Jeremiah.
Oh, okay.
Do
Well,
I need a ticket for Node Interactive to show up at the Collaborator Summit?
Well, first of all, IBM has like 30 tickets, so just you can probably get a ticket to the conference.
Just show up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the collab summit on the second half, like, yeah, if you flew to Austin and just wanted to come to the collab summit, we would let you in. Bert.
Okay, good. You should one
Okay,
day you should stop me at the door. Okay, cool.
okay.
I don't think Michael's never been stopped at a conference door before, so I think you're now in that alumni boat where you just won't get stopped.
I routinely walk into conferences that I don't have a ticket for.
Well, I did
Okay.
that once at like Jan Leonard's conference, and he was not amused about it. So.
I've walked into that conference without a ticket for 3 years.
Okay. Let's move on to
Alright.
let's move on to private business now.
All right.
Unless,
Yeah, there's no
unless anyone
questions.
has
So thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.